largest area in Blender's general layout is the 3D viewport editor. As we can see, this area has many elements. The heading area of the 3D viewport contains several grouped options. These groups are the mode currently being used, a main menu for the 3D viewport, a group of controls used when manipulating scene items, and a set of options on how we want to see our scene displayed in the viewport. All of these will be described in more detail in later videos, but for the moment we should be aware of the two most useful mode settings. Clicking here gives a drop-down list of available modes, but the two most important ones at this stage are Object Mode and Edit Mode. In Object Mode we can only manipulate the meshes in our scene as single entities, meaning they can be moved, rotated or resized but must retain their basic shape. In Edit Mode we can gain access to all the vertices, edges and faces that make up the currently selected mesh. This gives us much greater control over reshaping a mesh. Although we can jump between Object and Edit Mode by choosing the appropriate entry in the drop-down list, a much quicker way is to press the Tab key, which toggles between these two modes each time it is pressed. For the moment, the last point of note in this area is that the menu lists headings changes depending on which mode we are in. To the top left, just below the heading area, is where we find lines of descriptive text. The top line gives us details of the viewpoint and the projection method. The viewpoint shows any predefined named viewpoint being used, such as front, left, or top. When the view is from any other position, we'll see the more general term, user. The second word in this line is the projection method being used, perspective or orthographic. The next line details the currently selected object. Here it's the cube within collection. A third line only appears when we are in a named view. It tells us the size of the smallest grid boxes visible in the 3D viewport. Here it's 10 centimeters. But the value will change depending on our zoom setting. To the left of the text is the toolbar. This contains the various tools available to use when we want to manipulate the meshes in our scene. Notice that, like the main menu headings, the contents of the toolbar change depending on the mode we are in. The size of the toolbar can be changed by dragging on its right edge. If we drag it out slightly, the tools reorganize themselves into two columns. Drag even further and it returns to a single column, but now descriptive text has been added, briefly explaining the purpose of each tool. If we drag far enough to the left, the toolbar will disappear completely and be replaced by a small, right-pointing arrow. Clicking or dragging on the arrow will restore the toolbar. We'll look at the toolbar in more depth in a later video. Looking at the right edge of the 3D viewport area, we'll see another arrow. This time pointing left. Clicking or dragging on this will produce another panel. This is known as the sidebar. The sidebar contains 3 tabbed pages: Item, Tool, and View. Each of these will be detailed in later videos. Dragging the left edge of the sidebar to the right will eventually reduce it back to the small arrow. As we'll soon see, there are many operations in Blender that can be achieved by keyboard shortcuts. For example, pressing the T key will toggle the showing and hiding of the toolbar, while the N key does the same for the sidebar. Beside the sidebar's arrow is the navigation gizmo. This allows us to do various operations which affect the view we see within the 3D viewport. In fact, there are so many of these options and keyboard shortcuts that navigation is covered in a separate video. In the main area of the 3D viewport we can see the world x-axis, shown in red, and the world y-axis, shown in green. But the world z-axis is not visible. Lying flat along the xy plane is a grid of gray lines. Each of these squares represents a 1 meter by 1 meter space in the real world. We'll see later that we can use other measurements such as yards, feet, kilometers, etc. Moving on to the scene being constructed, perhaps the most obvious element is the cube object sitting at the center of the scene. This is one of the mesh primitives available in Blender and is always created by default in every new project. The orange spot within the cube represents the center or origin of the cube. Every mesh has its own point of origin, and when we move a mesh within the scene, the complete mesh moves in such a way as to place its origin at the specified location in 3D space. Another element within the 3D viewport is the light, shown as a set of concentric circles and a single straight line. The circles represent the position of the light and the line symbolizes a beam of light. By default this is a point light, casting light equally in all directions. The strange pyramid-like shape represents a camera. It's the view from this camera that is used when we create a rendered image. Note that the camera will probably use a different viewpoint from the one we see in the 3D viewport. What looks like a set of rifle crosshairs is the 3D cursor. When we add a new object to our scene, it is always positioned so that its origin is in the same location as the 3D cursor. When we start a new project, the 3D cursor is placed at the world origin, that is at coordinates 0, 0, 0. We saw in the last video that we can select any object in our scene simply by clicking on its name in the outliner editor, but we can also select it directly simply by clicking on the object within the viewport. To deselect an item, all that is required is to left-click an empty area of the scene. To delete any object, we need to first select it and then press either the delete key, which deletes the object immediately, or press the X key, in which case we need to confirm that we want to delete the object. Adding a new mesh is achieved by selecting Add from the 3D viewport's main menu, then Mesh, then the type of primitive we want to add. In this case we'll choose UV sphere. More details on adding and deleting meshes will be given in a later video. Don't forget to download the book pages that go with this video. You'll find the PDF file on our website. Just click on the Blender button of the home page, then on the link to the file for video 5.